Hey folks, welcome back to another session of the CCNA initiative. Today, of course, we are having Lab Fun Day, of course, and with every Lab Fun Day, we go ahead and go over what we spoke about in theory on the previous day, right? And so, chapter 7, right, it's focusing around configuring and verifying switch interfaces, okay? And so, this is just to make sure that we hit the objectives, right, on the CCNA that we need to understand and make sure we can comprehend, right? And those objectives being under the 1.0 network fundamentals section of the CCNA 200-301, right? And it being explaining the role and function of network components, right? Uh, L2 and L3 switches, right? Under that, right? And describing, right, switching concepts. Okay. And so yesterday, right, I showed you guys what a switch looks like. I showed you guys, in theory, of course, what it looks like to configure speed, duplex, description, set a description under interface, right? Um, Showed you guys also, right, how you can configure multiple interfaces at the same time with the interface range command, right? Of course, I showed you guys some, there was a couple of notes about some shorthand that I will show you, right? So you don't have to fully type out the command, right? Because you guys, now that we hit chapter 7, you guys have seen enough lab fun days to start beginning to shorthand, right? But of course, best practice, I want you guys to type it out so you can know it, right? And register it in your mind so you know what that command is. Okay. Um, of course, we went over making sure we understand how to administratively control an interface state with the shutdown commands, right? And of course, we also learned how to remove configuration, right, with the no command, right? So we're going to go over all of that today, right? We're going to go ahead and touch on that today. First things first, right? I wanted to tell you guys about my lab, right? Typically, you guys see these labs that we have fuel 5 more devices, right? With me giving you guys the proof of concept, we only just need one device, right? We're only talking about a switch. So we're only going to be configuring working on one device today, right? So we have switch 1 in our virtual lab, okay? So first things first, right? This is a switch, right? And we can actually take a look at the interfaces, right? And if you guys remember that command, right? And I believe if I shared that command with you guys, it should be show interface status, right? We can see all the interfaces on the switch. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay. So, right. And exactly just like I showed you guys yesterday, right? The show interface status is giving us what port it is, right? Is giving us the name. If there was a description configured on that port, right? The status, right? It tells us it's not connected, right? And of course, what VLAN it is, the duplex, right? Um, the speed and the type, right? Let me go ahead and take a second, right, and explain what some of these things mean, right? So let's look under port, right? If we see port, right, we see GI 0/0. What does that mean, right? So GI is shorthand for gigabit Ethernet, okay? So let's say we're in global configuration mode, right? And we want to make a modification within this interface. We can put interface and of course and type this out, right? GI 0/0, and the switch will know, right? The intelligent developers, right, that created Cisco's iOS, they made it a way to where we can shorthand. So we can actually shorthand that command to get to this interface. Okay. Next, name, right? Just like yesterday we went over, right? Name shows the description that you configured on an interface. Okay. So, just like we were going over an example with Makivia and Ryan yesterday, right? Maybe Makivia put a description saying, hey, this is where end users connect. You can put that on the description. And if you run the command, show interface status, you can see a shortened version, right, of the name. Okay. Status, right? So status tells you, right? It tells you layer 1 and layer 2, right? All at the same time. It tells you if it's connected or not connected. Okay. Um, I'm gonna lean towards more layer 1 for the status part, right? Because it's telling you if anything's connected to it. Not so much if it's shut down, right? If anything's connected to it. Okay. Um, so and of course, I'll show you what that show interface status um command looks like, right? under the status section if there was an interface that was shut down with the shutdown command, right? That does look different under status, okay? So I'll show you that as well, all right? Also shows you the VLAN. That's one thing I do love, right? Because of course we can set different physical ports into different VLANs, okay? And of course the duplex, right? So duplex, I don't want to get too in depth into it, right? I'm gonna put it into my own words, right? So duplex gives us the ability, right? It gives a physical port a ability to send traffic bidirectionally, right? Or in one way, right? And our two options that we have to be able to do that is either full, right? Send traffic bidirectionally, right? Or half, right? Send traffic one way, one at a time, right? Just like the old days, right? Whenever, all devices, all hosts were connected to one bridge, right? Where they all shared the same collision domain, right? And if we, you know, go ahead and go back to the previous chapters, we learned about how, a switch was an upgraded version of a bridge, right? To where a bridge was an entire collision domain, right? So, or a hub, right? It was an entire collision domain, right? So all the hosts had to go ahead and wait their turn to send traffic on a network, right? Because if they all sent traffic at the same time, of course, it would cause a collision, right? So they had to wait, right? And of course, that host couldn't send traffic and receive traffic at the same time, right? So it was operating in half duplex, okay? With a switch, right? Instead of the entire device being a collision domain, right? Each physical port is its own collision domain, right? And that port is part of a broadcast domain, right? Broadcast domain meaning a local area network, right? In this case, right, since we have the, Cisco iOS has the ability to assign ports to specific local area networks virtually, that's configured, right, VLANs, right? It is part of the same VLAN, right, of different ports, right? So you can communicate with, you can go ahead and communicate with another host that's on, that's connected to the same switch because it's in the same broadcast domain, right? But you won't have the issue of worrying about, hey, I have to wait till, host A sends data before I can send data or receive it at the same time. Okay, so that's the benefit, of course, having switch nowadays and operating in full duplex. Okay, so speed. Speed, we can set it statically. We have our different options. We have 10 meg, 100 meg, 1 gig, 10 gigs, 40 gigs. The list goes on, right? It's unlimited, right? By default, out of the box, right? I want you guys to take a look at duplex while I'm saying this as well, right? The term auto negotiation, and we're going to get to that section tomorrow, right? The term auto negotiation means, right? It means that these values, right? Speed and duplex, right? Between two physical connections, right? Maybe, Ethernet cable between them, one RJ45 connector to one switch, and one RJ45 connector maybe to a host or to another switch, right? What happens, right, with auto negotiation is exactly what the word says, right? These hosts negotiate automagically of what speed and duplex they're both going to use. Okay, so under the duplex section, right, you see the A, that means it auto negotiated that it's going to run at full duplex, right? Under speed, of course, if you can see for each interface set to auto, that means it's auto negotiating the speed whenever something else is connected to it. All right. Last but not least, type, right? And this is very important. Of course, this is hard. This is hard to go ahead and emulate in a virtual lab. So I'll make sure that I will get my physical lab up and running so you guys can see the difference, right? But you see the type, it says RJ45, right? Tells us the type of port, right? There are different types of ports, right? Like like one port using a transceiver, right? For a fiber connection, right? And there's many other port types, right? That we can see that as long as the iOS, right, supports, you will see that, right, for that specific port. But now that we went over this, right, we went over the show interface status, right? let's go ahead and start digging deep. Let's go ahead and configure the speed in the duplex for interface, okay? So let's start with gigabit 0/0, right? Interface, right? I'm going to do longhand first, right? Meaning I'm going to spell out the actual command, right? I'm not going to shorthand first. So interface gigabit 0/0, and I'm sorry, I shorthanded the first part, but I longhanded everything else. So interface, right? Gigabit Ethernet 0/0. So that is the entire command. Okay. So now I am in interface configuration mode for gigabit Ethernet 0/0, right? So let's go ahead, right? Let's go ahead and test out what we learned yesterday, right? First, let's go ahead and do the help command, right? So we can see what options we have to us, right? Even though we're just worried about speed, duplex, and description, I want you guys to see what options we have on interface configuration mode. As you guys can see, we have plenty of options, right? A lot of options that are outside of the scope of the CCNA, right? So let's just focus on the ones that we learned yesterday, okay? Let me reset the terminal so you don't get confused, right? Let's type duplex, right? And what options we have? We have auto, full, and half, right? Auto means, of course, we enable it to automatically configure duplex, right? Full, right? Well, we're exactly what it says. We're forcing we're forcing this interface to run in full duplex, right? We're statically setting it, right? And half, same thing. We're statically setting this interface to run in half duplex, right? So let's go ahead and set it to let's see if we can set it to half or set it to full. I know there's some limitations within virtual labs, but let's see what we can do. All negotiation enabled. Okay, all right. So I may have to disable all negotiation. Give me 1 second. Right. Give me 1 second. Duplex cannot be set. No auto. All right, we can figure this out. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Just doing some Google Foo, guys. It's been a while. I believe there is a command I can go ahead and use and configure that. Give me 1 second. There we go. There we go. Okay, so and this is a great lesson, and I'll actually share this in the description, right? So before we configure the duplex, right, we have to make sure that we configure the speed first before we can change it, right? So let's go ahead and do this, right? So I'm going to set the speed, right? And of course, just like I explained to you guys in duplex, let's go over the options we have for speed. So we have 10 megs, right? To go ahead and statically set it to 10 megabits per second operation, right? 100 megs, 1,000 meg, which of course is 1 gig, and of course the auto, right? So let's see if we can go ahead and set it statically, right? And we actually cannot. So this may be, and I want to do this in real time because I don't, I want you guys to see how this looks like. Okay. Give me 1 second. And I love to do things in real time because, of course, everything is not going to be perfect. Okay. So let's, right, speed cannot be set. And there should be a way to fix this. go. Guys. All right, guys, we're back. Thanks for that. Thanks for giving me some time to take a look. I had to use some Google Foo. It has been a while, but I actually figured it out. So, where we left off at, right? We were trying to configure the duplex and the speed, right? But of course, we were getting the error, right? We were getting the error that, hey, you can't configure speed or duplex because auto negotiation is set, right? Well, with some Google Foo and help with some Cisco documents, right? I was able to find out why that was the case, right? Because there's an actual command to set negotiation to auto. So before we set the speed in the duplex, and of course, you guys may have to do this in your lab. So that's I wanted to make sure I slow it down and show you guys this error, not really try to make this lab perfect because of course it's the lab. And I know sometimes within some of these YouTube tutorial videos, they miss out the part where they have to troubleshoot. So I wanted to show you guys the entire right process, right? So let's go back to the interface that we chose, right? So it's interface gigabit, right? And I'm going to longhand it, just like I promised you guys, right? Gigabit Ethernet 0/0, right? So before we even go ahead and test, right, and try to go ahead and configure speed and duplex, right, we need to go ahead and disable negotiation, right? Auto negotiation, right? To do that, there is a command, right? And let's do the help room so we can take a look at it, okay? And there we go, right? And I'll show you what that command actually is, right? And let's stop right there because that's it, right? So here's the command, right? This is where, right, and take note of this, this is where we can select the auto negotiation mode. So it's that the command is negotiation, right? We need to make sure we put that first, right? And let me go ahead and take out all this muck. We reset it, right? Go back into interface configuration mode. I mistakenly went back down to privilege exec mode, right? So I need to put no negotiation, right? And if I do a question mark again, right, it was set to auto, right? But if we do a show run, right, and we'll do it in a few, we're not going to see this command under it. That's because it's in the background, okay? Right? So this is a quick little Easter egg gem that I'm giving you guys for your labs. Take heed of it, okay? So before we can set the duplex and the speed, right? We need to go ahead and disable on negotiation. Perfect. So we disabled it, right? So let's go ahead and test it, right? So in that, in the book yesterday, right? We went over it, of course, in our PowerPoint. Showed you guys a screenshot of Emma, right? She's configuring a switch and she went ahead and set the duplex to full, set the speed to 100. So let's go ahead and try that, right? So duplex, right? We're going to set it to full, right? And speed, we're going to set to 100, okay? And just to correct myself, right? I know I told you guys a little bit earlier in this video that we may have to configure maybe a duplex first and the speed. Please take that out of your head. This was just a software issue that I had to configure, right? So I do apologize about that. I have no problem explaining my wrongs. So let's keep going, right? I relearned something, and of course you guys are learning something new. Okay, so we set the duplex, we set the speed, right? I set it to duplex to full, and I set the speed to 100, right? But Emma also put a description, right, on the interface as well. So let's go ahead and do that, right? So to do that, there's a command called description, right? And we can go ahead and put, right, printer on third floor, exactly what Emma did, right? Preset, right? Because we want to make sure that the people that we work with know what we did, right? Right? So we set this interface, right? It's not doing no auto negotiation, right? And we statically set it for a speed of 100 right? And the duplex to be full duplex, right? Right? And what Emma also did, right? She also, configured multiple interfaces at the same time. But let's go ahead and take our time first and let's see how the interface looks now that we made our changes, right? Show interfaces status. Okay, so as you can see, right? As you can see, we see our changes, right? We see our description right here, right? And of course, like I did tell you guys, right? It's going to be a shorthand, right, of a description. It's I'm not going to show you the whole thing. To see the whole thing, we would have to do a show run interface, right, to see what's actually set there, right? Of course, like I told you guys, the status in VLAN, right? And what we're worried about here is a change that we made, right? We statically set it to full. So there's no A dash full in front of it, right? And the speed, right, is set to 100. Okay. So that's how it looks like after we go ahead and configure it, right? And guys, thank you so much for being patient while I troubleshoot it, what have you. And I'm glad this makes sense, right? Now, let's move on to the next one, right? Of course, we went over how to configure interface, right? But Emma, right, with her switch, she was also able to configure multiple interfaces at the same time, okay? So how do we do that, right? Well, there's a command, right? The interface range command that enables to do so, right? So let's practice that, right? On interfaces gigabit Ethernet 1/0 all the way to gigabit Ethernet 1/3, right? So first we put in interface, right? And then we would type the keyword range, okay? And of course, they're gigabit interfaces, so we're going to type out gigabit Ethernet, right? And I'm going to type 0, right? Slash, I'm sorry, because the slot number is 1. So 1/0, right? 0 being the first interface number, right? In slot 1, right? And it's going all the way to 3, right? We don't have to put the slot number again, right? Because it's going in sequential order, okay? Now, what does this mean after I press enter, right? We are in interface configuration mode for the interfaces ranging from 1/0 to 1/3, okay? So let's go ahead and put a description on it and see if that changes, right? The changes that we make, right? The description that we put reflects on the show interface status command, okay? So exactly like Emma did, let's go ahead and put end users, right? Connect here. All right. Now that we did that, let's go ahead. Let's exit interface configuration mode so we don't mistakenly configure something. Let's do a show interfaces status again, right? Okay. So now you see, right? Now you see that interface range command actually works, right? We were able to make changes to multiple interfaces at the same time. Okay. Right? What's another way we can go ahead and verify this, right? Let's go ahead and hop out of privilege executive, okay? Reset the terminal, right? And let's take a look at our running configuration, right? And let's see if the change that we make matches up, okay? In detail, okay? All right, so we can stop right here. All right, so we see our first changes, right? We disabled auto negotiation, right? And we also set the speed and duplex, and we put a description on interface gigabit Ethernet 0/0. So that's set there, right? We also can verify, right? Because there's multiple ways to verify things, right? We also can verify, right, the description, right? We can verify the description has been set on multiple interfaces, okay? So we've seen how to configure speed and duplex, right? And we also, right, we also went ahead and configured descriptions on interface. So that covers the first part of what we went through, right? And of course, I do want to make a correction, right? On the newest switches, right? I know I said earlier that typically, seeing negotiation under a interface, whenever you run the show run or show start command, that you wouldn't see the negotiation auto command, right? This being old code in this lab, it is showing, right? Typically, right, on newer model switches that you guys probably work with in your production environment, right? You wouldn't see this. Okay. So just of course, just for the sake of labbing and prep for the CCNA, you may see the negotiation auto command. You may not, right? So just not a big deal. Just want you guys to take heed of that. Okay. So we went ahead and configured that. Of course, I showed you guys, of course, longhand, right, on how to do those interfaces. So in our next exercise, I'm going to do shorthand, right? And what we're going to do is practice administratively controlling an interface state with the shutdown command, okay? So we configured gigabit 0/0, right? And we set the speed, we set the duplex, and we put a description, right? But just like we were speaking about, right, is that, what if we wanted to go ahead and, change the state of that interface because maybe it's causing problems on the network. Maybe it's not, right? Us being, CCNA, CCNA, you guys being future CCNA candidates, right? And me being a CCNA, anybody that's going to control a switch or manage a switch, right? We can manage that interface, right? And say when to operate and when not to operate with the shutdown command, right? So let's go ahead and do that, right? First, let's verify, right, the current status of it right now. Show interface status. Show interface, right? And remember that command, right? Gigabit 0/0 status. Okay, right? And I wanted to shorthand it, right? And so we're not, mucking up the CLI, right? So we see, right? Not connected, not so much we disabled it or we disabled the interface yet. So there's no changes here, right? So I want you guys to watch out for a change here. Okay. So let's go into the interface. I'm going to shorthand it, right? And let me explain the shorthand, right? So INT, right? It resolves to interface, right? GI resolves to gigabit, right? And there's only one, there's only one 0/0, right? So what do I mean by that, right? Let me slow it down, right? If I put question mark, I'm sorry, that was too early. Let me reset, right? So if I do INT, right? There's no ambiguous, resolutions, right? There's not multiple options for INT. There's only interface, right? So it can only resolve to interface, right? If I put GI and a question mark behind it, it can only resolve to gigabit Ethernet, right? So the switch knows, right? The iOS knows, oh, GI, he's shorthanding for gigabit Ethernet. That's what it resolves to. You don't have to type out the entire command, okay? And 0/0, of course, the slot and the port number, boom, right? And so there's only, of course, only one option for that, right? So let's go ahead and change the state of this interface, right? By default, switches out of the box, every port is enabled, right? Um, it can start processing frames, right? Since we're talking about layer 2, it can start processing frames and forwarding frames and perform expanding tree, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what if we, because what we want to prove the concept today is what if we go ahead and want to control the state of it, right? And disable, right, this interface. I can put the command shut down. There should be a syslog message that pops up after this, right? All right, so syslog message popped up telling me that it has been administratively shut down, right? So what happens if I do another show interfaces, gigabit 0/0 status? That changed, right? The status changed, right? So now it says disabled, right? So now it says disabled. So it doesn't say connected or not connected. It says disabled. This means from a layer 1 standpoint, even if you connect something, it's not going to work because an administrator disabled it. Okay? Here's a quick Easter egg, right? Show IP interface brief. Now, this command, right? It's a layer 1 all the way through layer 3 command, right? I'm sure you guys can tell once I said IP, right? And you can configure, you can go ahead and verify layers 1 through layer 3, but this gives you an actually better viewpoint, right, of the status, right? Of course, this previous command just tells you, hey, you just disable the port. But with the next command, again, I'm giving you Easter eggs, says actually what it is, right? It's administratively shut down. Somebody went into the interface and interface configuration mode and actually shut it down. Okay. What's another way that we can take a look at, right? So within, right, yesterday's session, we also saw that we can look in detail, right, how that looks, right? If we want to see the interface configuration in detail, right? As you can see, just doing show interfaces with no status at the end, we can see in detail, right? Interface name, layer 1 and layer 2, right? And of course, administratively being down, right? That affects layer 1, okay? Layer 2 by default, right? Since, either going up or down operates, right next to it, adjacent to it, right? It's going to be down as well, right? Because it's a disable. So it affects 1 and 2, right? And of course, 3 and so on, okay? And it tells you all the detailed information within that, right? So plenty of ways to get your answer, all right? So that covers that, right? And last but not least, right? Last but not least, let's make sure that we cover this, and this is a very important topic that we need to cover, which is going to help you moving forward with troubleshooting, administrating the switch, and this is removing configuration with the no command, right? So let's look at an interface that we configure. Okay, so we're going to stick with gigabit Ethernet 0/0, right? We've added tons of things, right, to this, right, to this interface, what have you, right? So what I want to do, right, is to remove configuration using the no command, okay? So let's do that, all right? So let's go to interface configuration mode, and we are going to go, right, I'm going to shorthand again, interface gigabit 0/0, right? So we're in this, right? So let's take a look at a couple of things that we configure. We configure shutdown, we configure speed, duplex, and we remove the configuration for auto negotiation, right? So, and of course we added a description. So let's go ahead and reverse all of this, okay? So we're going to do no description. We're going to go in order. All right, okay? So that removed that, right? Let's verify and see if it did actually remove it, right? So let's do a show interface, right? And by the way, the do command enables you to run commands, right? Like show commands within global configuration mode. Because typically in global configuration mode, you cannot run show commands. It's typically run in user or privilege exempt mode, okay? And I apologize, that was the wrong command. Let's do show run, then interface. Perfect, right? So no longer, right, is description there, right? Because we removed it, right? Let's do some other things, right? Let's remove speed. Let's remove duplex, right? Let's remove the interface being shut down, right? Of course, the syslog message should pop up, right? Saying, of course, it's down, but of course, administratively, it's not shut down anymore, right? And let's actually reverse, right, what we've done. So before it was we removed the auto negotiation configuration by putting no. We're going to set it back, right, to being auto. Okay. So let's go ahead and verify, right, our changes, right? To do that, let's look at our configuration. Show run interface, gigabit 0/0. Perfect, right? So we were able to remove all of the configuration that we set statically at the beginning of the slide, right? And reverse, right? Reverse what we removed, right? Which is the auto negotiation. So we went ahead and set that, right? And let's also check it, because I like to, of course, like I've been showing you guys, check it in multiple places, right? Because I want to, even though I trust myself, right, and I trust this software, right, we have to make sure that we verify, right? So let's check it another place, right? Reset the terminal. Let's do a show interface status. Perfect, right? So it reverted back, right? Might be a software glitch, right? It's still showing 100, right? But we can go ahead and fix that later, right? But of course, it's back to auto negotiation. So if I plug in maybe a gigabit interface to 0/0, it will auto negotiate, right? Because it's set to auto. All right. So with that being said, that covers everything that we went over, right? Yesterday. Okay. So, and of course, as always, right? And let me pull up the PowerPoint because I just want to make it a good point because I know there was a difference and I don't want to cause confusion. Got the PowerPoint up. Let me bring it to the other side. Remember we went over it yesterday, right? The show running config and the show startup config command typically do not display default configuration settings. So the absence of commands listed under interface faster than 0/2 at the end of the example means that those commands are now default values, right? So what does that mean? Okay. Show run interface gig 0/0, right? So now that we removed all the configuration, right? We set it back to its default configuration. Just because it's not there doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? It just means it's in its default configuration. Okay. And of course, like I stated earlier about negotiation auto, on these newer switches, negotiation auto isn't there, but it does exist it does actually exist on the switch for that interface faces configuration. Okay. So with that being said, this is the end of Lab Fun Day, and tomorrow we're going to continue with Chapter 7. And funny enough, we are going to go into the section of auto negotiation. You guys have a great day.